In Nigeria, many households still rely on polluting energy sources like firewood, charcoal, and petrol-powered generators due to unreliable electricity from the national grid. Now, even when families can afford clean energy options like solar or bioenergy, they often continue using traditional fuels due to cultural preferences, cost, or even the availability. Now, this behavior is called energy stacking and is common across both urban and rural energies. To discuss further on this, we have three guests. We have, first of all, Desmond Majekodumi, an environmentalist in Lagos, Nigeria. We also have Ernesto Dibia, Programs Manager, Public and Climate Health Advocate in Lagos. And we also have joining us Oluwatosin Ajide, Programs Lead, Nigeria Climate Innovative Center, Lagos, Nigeria. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us at this time.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure to have you. All right, let me begin with Desmond. Desmond, if you can hear me. Now, given that Nigeria and many sub-Saharan African countries are still heavily dependent on traditional fuels like firewood and charcoal, what are the immediate steps needed to curb carbon emissions and also reduce air pollution in these regions?
Thank you. Very good question. Well, the immediate steps are steps that should have been taken about 20 years ago. I remember myself personally going to a president who had just been elected before he had taken office with an old solar cell. And I said, Mr. President-elect, please, let's see what we can do to introduce this technology into particularly the rural areas. I was thinking particularly, specifically of those areas in the riverine areas where it's difficult to get electricity across. And he sort of looked and he said, yeah. Anyway, nothing was done. So that's what we need to do. We need to just do what we need to do, which is to ensure that we give our people clean, renewable energy at a cost that shall be very, very affordable. The technology in solar has gone through the roof now. The prices have dropped dramatically, and the power that you can get from those solar cells is so much more than what it used to be 20 years ago. So that's what we have to do. We have no choice, really. It's just, it's more than ludicrous that a country that has the amount of sunlight that we have in Nigeria, we've got all it takes to give our people almost free, renewable, clean energy. And it's not just the solar. There's also wind. Talking about which, there you go. Wind. We have so much wind all along our shore, all in the highland areas of this country. We got wind, and again, the wind energy systems are far more efficient. And if that's not enough, we got a lot of water as well. So there's no excuse. The only implication is that the civil servants, and I use that word very, very specifically, that is the people who are in the civil service, that is people who are servants to the population, are not serving the population very well, sorry to say.
All right, so let's get to hear, same question from Oluwatosin. Oluwatosin, can you go ahead and tell us, what the immediate steps are that, is needed to curb carbon emissions and also, reduce air pollution in Nigeria?
All right, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Please go ahead.
All right, I think I'll just build on what Desmond has said. I mean, Desmond has, already said a good note or started on a good tone on, renewable energy and solar. But I'll even come from another aspect, which is, the biomass and the clean cooking gas, right? We have a lot of portfolios, innovators that have been able to deploy innovations like clean cooking stove. We have someone like Power Stove in Abuja who has deployed and has had an innovator that can, make good clean cooking stove that use biomass and is quite efficient. It's quite cheaper than solar, and I sometimes ask myself why this is not being deployed, nationwide. We already have these innovators here in Nigeria. They are Nigeria-made power stoves. These materials are available. They are cheaper than solar. We could easily look at that. I mean, solar is one, but we always say solar is expensive and all. But if solar is expensive and you can't afford solar, what about the clean cooking stove, right? This is locally fabricated. it uses briquettes. Briquette has been made from rice husk. These things are easily accessible, right? What we need to do is to make sure these things are being deployable to different part of the country, especially the vulnerable part of the country, people that can't easily have access to these things, right? They don't have access to power, they don't have access to the grid, but they can have access to this clean cooking gas. And the lifespan is quite long, 7 to 10 years, right? And it's very, very cheap. I think with less than 70 to 60,000 naira, you can have one, and you can always have the biomass and the briquettes as cheap as 1,000 per probably 5 or 6 kilos, right? These are some of the things that we can easily deploy at this level. And sometimes I ask myself why these innovators are not heavily, invested in and backed by the government, because it's an easy and tested power stove that has been used, even being currently exported to some African countries. So if it's being exported to some African countries, why can't we, heavily invest in it in Nigeria and have a lot of people using this clean cooking power stove?
Okay. All right, now let's hear from Ernesto. Ernesto, you heard what Oluwatosin has actually said, and he did say that there are materials cheaper than solar that can be used as renewable energy. Now, but I want you to tell us, how realistic is it to achieve net zero emissions, by 2050? And are there specific targets that Nigeria or African governments should set?
Okay, yes. So that's a very interesting question because regarding how realistic it would be for us to attain net zero. I mean, currently we've even had, initially the target was for 2050, but very recently we've had the Nigeria's long-term low emission development strategy move it from 2050 to 2060. Right, we've had to draw it back, give ourselves some extra grace because we realized that we're not going to attain that. And by not attaining, what do I mean by that? I mean that there's actually, the plan is actually on board for us to, we need to reduce our dependence on gas by 41% by 2030 and by 82% by 2050. That's on oil, and for gas we need to reduce our dependence on gas by 78% by 2050. Those are very, very interesting numbers that that are really, really close home if we think about it real deep. And honestly, it's extremely difficult. I don't want to say it's impossible, but I think it's extremely difficult for us to actually attain net zero by 2050.
Why is that?
Essentially, what that means is we're trying to ensure that we're still heavily dependent. Fundamentally, one is that we're still dependent heavily on a lot of fossil fuels. A lot of families are really, really dependent on basics, and cooking with firewood, a lot of these things. And so it's a little difficult, number one. Number two, a lot of our own practices, human practices, like deforestation, is still on the rise, leading to a lot of extreme cases like desertification, like flooding. There are a lot of things that are actually happening. So can we meet the 2050 target? It's a very tight question to ask me, so I'm just going to say yes. But we definitely, like people who spoke before me said, need to put out some very, very stringent measures to get there.
All right. Now over to you, Desmond. Now, Ernesto said, yes, we can actually reach 2050 target to achieve net zero emissions. Would love to, find out your take on it, if you feel it is actually true, if we can definitely reach that, and what strategies the government can actually set. All right, let's hear that same question from you, Oluwatosin.
All right. I mean, I like like you said, it's a difficult question, but again, at the same time, we have to be, optimistic. And what I would say is, why we are trying to achieve that, we need to also just start from somewhere, right? Like you said, we are heavily dependent on, so many. We are definitely rely on gas and the petrol and coal, right? So it makes it even more difficult. But that is not even what I think is going to be the major determinant. I think the priority from the government is making it a priority. What are the cost implication? Green or climate space or green finance is not cheap, right? We need infrastructures. What are the infrastructures that are being put in place for this to be achieved? I mean, like you said, your question is realistic. For it to be realistic, we need to, speak frankly to each other, right? Are there infrastructure in place? They just they just have proposed the next budget for the next coming year, 2025, right? How much was budgeted in it for, green financing and what, right? These are the kind of questions that we ask ourselves for us to know if it's actually realistic or not. The infrastructure for green space or green technology or green innovation is quite huge. There is a big gap, in the infrastructure that we need in this country for us to achieve that. And to be frank, I'm not seeing a lot of that happening right now. I'm not seeing a lot of infrastructure, a lot of investment coming into the country for green infrastructure. So is it realistic? Well, I will say, 2050 is still far, but I think if we're going to achieve that, we have to start, prioritizing it. We have to, and it has to start reflecting in the, the amount budgeted for it in each of our, in each year, right? Each year, where the project is being um, presented, we need to see how much goes into green financing, green infrastructure. Then from there, we can see how realistic it is. But for now, it's still very tight, and I can't really see that happening in the next 5 years. Seeing those infrastructure being developed. So until those infrastructures are being developed, and we can see a lot of priorities on green financing innovators, financing the MSC, the SMEs, and all that needs to build this green economy. If it's not being there, then we might need to start asking ourselves a tougher questions if this is actually realistic, or we need to push it further along, maybe 2080 or so.
All right, now let's find out if Desmond has, a different point of view to this. Now, Ernesto has said, it's very, very possible. It's very possible to achieve, that target in 2050. And Oluwatosin has actually said it's quite tight unless we do the needful. Now, let's hear from you, Desmond. Do you think it is realistic to achieve net zero emissions by 2050, or do we have to push it to 2080?
It has to dawn on humanity, not just Nigeria now. We're talking about humanity. When the Secretary General of the United Nations himself makes the kind of statements that he's making, like in 2015 at the COP conference, that was the conference they had in Paris, where everybody agreed, we're going to reduce we're going to just reduce it, especially the CO2. And he said at that conference, he said, mankind is waging war against nature, and this is suicidal because nature always fights back. Of course, nature gives you back what you give her. I'm standing in the middle of a palm plantation, and believe you me, after 35 years, I've never seen any of my palm trees produce any mango. And we have a few mango trees, and they don't produce palm fruit because nature is tied down to the most fundamental law, and that is the law of action begetting reaction. What you sow is what you reap. And guess what? After the Secretary General made that statement that humanity is committing suicide, and everybody agreed to reduce, by 2023, the emissions had never ever been so high. At the last conference that they had in 2023, this was the declaration. And at that conference, he now said, we're heading straight forward towards climate hell. It's like going on a road, so a very fast speed on a road. And at the middle of that road, and if some kilometers down, there's like a bridge that has collapsed. And if you try to get to that where the bridge was, you take your vehicle over the cliff. And guess what he said? He said, our foot is still on the accelerator. We haven't even slowed down. And it's now an emergency. In fact, he said it's no longer a crisis. He said it's an emergency. He said it's the most defining issue that humanity has ever faced, not just Nigeria. So the young people, and I'm so glad that we have people here, yourself and the two other young gentlemen there, the young people of Nigeria, they have to rise up and join hands with the young people all over the world. There has to be a youth quake, a getting together and a deciding of the youth that we are going to bring about the cut in these emissions, no matter what it takes, because our very life support system is at stake. Do you know that it's been categorically worked out now? And we've been told by the World Meteorological Organization, we've been told by the International Panel for Climate Change, we have 8 to 10 years max to get this thing really, really under check and reduce it massively. Otherwise, what happens is we go into what they call the tipping point scenario, whereby certain aspects of the planet itself that used to absorb the carbon dioxide will now become emitters of the CO2. And there's so many things that we need to do. And one of those things is to protect our forests. We have to
Okay,
ensure
but Desmond, is it possible to, just switch to renewable energy or stop carbon emissions, or do we have to overcome the challenges, like high cost of petrol, unreliable grid infrastructure, and also let's not forget energy stacking or cultural preferences, for traditional cooking, because in as much as we have, some of these renewable energy.
Very good question.
Okay, so do we have to overcome all of these challenges first?
No, this is a very, very good question. And you see, if we had taken note of the warnings, which were given 30 years ago, 20 years ago, it would have been a far more gradual process. But now, because we have reached a stage which is irreversible, again, think about it, a vehicle rushing down a road, heading towards a cliff, a precipice, okay? And your foot is still on the accelerator, huh? So yeah, it's going to hurt now. It's going to be very, very painful. But luckily, we do have a plan. And that plan is for the African nations to come together, for Nigeria, the great Nigeria, the giant of Africa, to bring nations, especially the West African subcontinent, together and to demand from the West, to demand big, big funding from the people that caused this problem in the first place, and to utilize that funding judiciously, not to just chop and wipe them out, but to utilize that funding judiciously to ensure that we can do this transition quickly. If the money is there, and if the sincerity of the people who are controlling the money is genuine, it can be done very, very rapidly. Yes. In just a few years, we can see some very rapid transitions. Things like just deploying solar panels all over the place. And not, in fact, there's already some systems that are in place now, economic systems, where you don't have to buy the solar panel right out. You pay a small deposit, and over a period of 10 years, or even 15 years, you pay it back slowly. It'll be far cheaper than your electricity bills, but you have free energy, you have free electricity. You can do that also with the gas systems, as our brother said. There's natural gas systems, bionic gas. We can get that from our waste as well, if we have to, at least do that to put it in as a stopgap measure. But it must be done. We're reaching a tipping point. It's just an emergency. It's not like, okay, we'll sort it out. No, those days are over. But on a final note, because I've been yabbing on too much, on a final note, the key is actually for humanity, and we in Nigeria, to have a renewal of our minds. We have to have a transformation into far more caring, far more compassionate souls. We have to really do that. We have to show far more love, especially to the young ones, to the children that are going to grow up. Otherwise, we're going to be condemning them to hellfire, and that shall not be their portion.
All right. Let's hear from Ernesto. Ernesto, do we have to, overcome the challenges that I had mentioned, of high cost of petrol, unreliable grid infrastructure, and Ernesto? So I'm being told that, we've lost Ernesto. But let's hear from Oluwatosin. Oluwatosin, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right, so do we have to overcome all these challenges, to accelerate the adoption of renewable energy, like solar or even bioenergy?
I think I agree with what Desmond said. Like, the time for us to stop before we start acting again, that time has way past. Right now, we have to do things simultaneously, right? While we are trying to stop some from happening, we have to keep accelerating towards, making sure we stop the emission of CO2. Right, so I think it's very important for us to, like you said, change our minds towards, or our mindset towards the whole climate space, right, and the whole CO2 emissions, as we're trying to stop the gap and the high cost and all, we should also put in place, the alternative. Like I always say, one of the major problems in Nigeria is the options. We don't really have much options or alternatives. Or either the alternative is always too expensive, or is not working, or is not lasting, right? So we need to, while doing some advocacy and trying to do some awareness for stop all of those things, we need to already start, accelerating some alternative that's going to help, adopt. Because right now, the climate crisis is not even about, mitigating anymore. It's more or less of, building resilience and adaptation. we need to start building more adaptation and building more resilience towards the effect of the climate change. So I think it's quite important that we, as much as we're trying to put in place some advocacy and trying to put in, stopping those challenges we've mentioned, you also at the same time put in a plan and start accelerating towards, adopting some adaptation or building resilience towards this effect of climate change. Or else, like that Desmond said, we will start finding ourselves in a space where we don't want to, find ourselves. And another thing we need to also see that also needs to see it as an opportunity. There's so much money to be making in the climate space. Even though there's a disaster, we can still find a way to make it and turn it into business, into an economy, right? So don't always let us see it as just a doomsday prophecy, but also see it as an opportunity to also build an economy, right? So I think, like you said, a mindset and also a renewal of mindset while building advocacy is very important.
Okay. All right. So, Ernesto, well, thank you for reconnecting with us. If you can hear me, we have over 2.6 billion people globally now still relying on polluting fuels for energy. What can be done or what can be implemented to ensure, affordable access to renewable energy, especially in low-income or even rural communities? All right, so let me pass that question to Desmond. Desmond, can you hear me?
Yes, what can be done?
Yes.
To make the renewable energy more
affordable for rural communities.
Yes. Well, again, we need to, as my brother just said, we need to really, really have that change of attitude. We have to. It's come to that stage. It's interesting when you look at the history of humanity over the thousands of years. We've always been, pretty aggressive. We've been quite greedy. We've been happy to perpetrate wars on each other, doing all sorts of things, slaughtering ourselves, fighting. The old weapons of warfare were not that effective, and then technology came in and we started developing more effective weapons. And a lot of the technological development, why this technology was developed?
And let's not forget also that technology is quite expensive, and this is the reason why I'm asking. When it comes to renewable energy, a lot of people have already said that renewable energy is expensive. So how can the rural areas and the local communities afford it?
Yes, we're coming to that, because the question that has to be asked is, why have these people not been supplied with this already? From a massively wealthy country like Nigeria, if we had deployed even just 25%, let alone 50%, of the money that is accrued from the fossil fuel, believe you me, every village in every rural area in this nation would have that type of wonderful electricity supply. Remember, I told you several decades ago, I tried to persuade one of our elected presidents to put this in place. It never happened. You have to have the right attitude. And you see what I was getting at by going into humanity's history and even our present, is that the technology that we have, we've been using it very negatively against nature. And one thing is, nature will give it back to you. And that's exactly what is happening. It's like an alarm call. Again, I quote the Secretary General of the United Nations. He said, the alarm has never been so loud that we have to change our attitudes. I know it's difficult. It's a bit of an inconvenient truth to accept. But the reality is that if we continue this way against nature, we will wreck our life support systems to an extent where we will be plagued with catastrophic consequences. Look at what happened in Valencia, Spain. In 8 hours, they got 12 months rain in 8 hours, wiped out a whole portion of that location. And right now, as we're talking in the Philippines, same sort of thing. So it just means that the leadership, the people who have access to the money, they need to just make sure these things are subsidized, if not even given for free to the rural communities. It can be done. Nigeria is a very wealthy nation. Once we can get over the corruption, once we can overcome that reality that, okay, well, we're just going to, chop this thing. No, it's over. It's over. There is a spiritual revolution that is now taking place. And that spiritual revolution is incumbent upon humanity, especially the young people, to ensure that we have this change, this attitude. And hey, guess what? It's there in all our scriptures anyway. It's there. Is it the Holy Bible? We're talking of retributive justice coming on humanity. Is it the Holy Quran? We're talking of kifara. It's there. So do the right thing and we'll get the right reaction. It can be done. It must be done. And that's the good thing about it.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Desmond Majakodumi, environmentalist, for joining us on the conversation this evening. We appreciate you and also for your opinion. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. With that, we'll take a break. And when we come back, we will continue with Ernesto Dibia and Oluwatosin Ajide, and we will be joined by Ruth Soro Nadi after the break. Stay with us. Welcome back, and thank you for joining us on the conversation. So we're discussing climate change and renewable energy on today's topic. And we've had Ernesto Dibia join us earlier. We've also had Oluwatosin Ajide join us earlier. And we will definitely be joined by Ruth Soro Nadi, a climate policy consultant. But, let's move the next question to Ernesto. Ernesto, thank you for reconnecting with us, by the way.
Yes, thank you so much.
All right, so let's hear from you. How possible is it to leverage technologies like, solar generators and also hybrid systems to overcome the issues of unreliable grid power, and also high diesel fuel costs in Nigeria?
Okay, so I believe that solar generation is actually a viable alternative to a lot of challenges regarding using fossil fuels in the country today. And that's fundamentally because it reduces our dependency on it a lot, right? And then I think a lot of people are of the opinion that we can't totally depend on solar generators because of how scanty they might be, considering our population, considering our about 200 million population in the country. However, I believe that solar generators can be used in a hybrid format for energy generation. For example, say just solar generators power some parts of the country during the day, and like our alternate power supply, like from water, from our windmills, parts of the country at night. And so I just think it could be better used in a hybrid format, right? So that we have absolute uptime across board for power generation as well. I think that's my submission. Thank you.
All right. So now, Ruth, thank you so much for joining us. Hello, Ruth. Can you hear me?
For having me.
Okay, it's a pleasure to have you as well. So can you tell us, how can the youth in Nigeria or even in Africa who are experiencing firsthand, the health impacts of pollution, how can they play a more active role in advocating for cleaner energy and holding governments accountable?
Thank you. So I would say three things on this. The first one is social media advocacy. As youths, they have a lot of opportunity to leverage social awareness about clean energy and accountability from policymakers. You cannot underestimate the power of youth using the social media to speak up concerning these policies. We have a lot of policies on ground, but our problem as Nigeria, as a country, and even Africa, it's not in the policies that are existing, it's in the implementation of the policies. If we can just implement even up to 50% of our policies, it would be something very, very, that would achieve sustainable development. And then secondly, community engagement. We could mobilize these youth-led clean energy campaigns in schools, in neighborhoods. Like I know in Lagos, they have this Green Club initiative. in some schools in Lagos. So we could harness that, the power of youth on their strengths. Having this campaigns can really see that cleaner energy, we have cleaner energy in Nigeria. And then lastly on this, I would also talk about the fact that youth can encourage youth to develop these clean energy startups. We have a lot of IT startups. We could have, as a country, clean energy startups, a lot of it. And then not just having those startups, having the government encourage that, incentivize it, support them financially. For instance, I know the Tony Elumelu Foundation, they support youth entrepreneurship in energy innovation. So we could have more such. We could have government energy, adding our government accountable to having cleaner energy in Nigeria.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So let's move on to Oluwatosin. Now, I know earlier we did talk about, what can be done to make renewable energy more affordable for rural areas and communities, considering that they use or the energy stack. Now, what about Nigerian households, who actually combine energy, that's traditional fuels and the rest? What can international climate finance, and I'm talking about, summits like the COP29 that's actually, going on at the moment. What can they do to be able to, provide affordable energy for Nigerian families? I'm talking about international climate finance, subsidies, and also domestic investments. What role can they play in making clean energy more affordable for Nigerian families?
Yeah, the international organization have there are diverse and several funds around the world, national funds, and some of it, my organization has benefited from some of it. There are some interventions around the world that could be, we could all, try to harness. But another important thing is we need international organizations to understand that every country has its own diverse challenges. And sometimes the criteria for accessing those funds are mostly to, sometimes I even say it's ridiculous, right? Some criteria are always too high. Sometimes your requirements to get those funding those can be, too tedious, right? And they need to understand that what probably works for a country in Europe or South America doesn't mean to work for, Nigeria. Right, and another key thing that can happen, is knowledge transfer. And I always tell people that knowledge transfer is one of the major things we need in Nigeria. Right, so we have our unique ways, our whole innovations that we come up with. So most of the times, we always need refining and we need, exposure. Right, so if international conferences like COP and the Red Chapter, we can call. When we go for conferences like that, we need to prioritize knowledge transfer. What is happening around the world? What is happening in Europe? What is happening in America that can be replicated in Nigeria? Right? It can be unique. Nigeria can have its own unique challenges, right? But we can adapt to some of those knowledge. We can adapt some of those innovations, and we still need work, right? For example, I was part of a consortium, ECAs, right, where we need to bring our innovation in UK to Nigeria. I think somewhere in India, in Edo State, right? And we work on a renewable energy digester that turns waste, cassava waste into energy, right? When we did that, we did a demonstration to see this works. Yeah, it actually works, right? And we've seen so many other knowledge transfer that we could.
So you're talking about biomass from organic waste, right?
Oh yes, I've seen it work severally. Like there's a company called Mayana. It's part of our portfolio in our company. We've been working with Mayana for about 3 or 4 years now. I went to Mayana's company, and we saw Mayana. This is not just a practical, right? It turns organic waste into biogas, and it used it to make food for us to eat. So this is not just telling you stories. It's something that actually works, right? It's a cluster that it makes that a cluster. You don't even need a cylinder, right? It just needs like a penthouse or a block of estates filling their gas with their house with pipes, and they run gas to all their kitchens, and it works, right? These things works. All we need to do is we need to be able to find a way to transfer knowledge internationally and even locally, right? People like Mayana needs to also look for a way to replicate it in other states, in other households, to see if it actually works beyond just probably other climates in probably in the northern part of the country. Can it also work in Lagos? Can it work in different part of the country, right? So we need to prioritize knowledge transfer. We need to prioritize research and development. We need to prioritize, innovation and advocacy for people to know that, these things work, right? And sometimes I ask myself, if people like Mayana are doing things like this, that is working,
how
say that it's working, why is there no investment going into it, right? So I think these are some of the things that international organizations can, look into. And I should also add that this was being funded by international organizations.
Okay. All right. Now, speaking of investments and also funding, over to you, Ruth. Can you tell us how global climate agreements such as, the Paris agreements, and the likes be better tailored to support energy transition in Nigeria, which face unique challenges, especially when it comes to, energy access and also infrastructure?
Thank you for this question. To answer this, I would say first, we need to push for debt-free climate finance. Nigeria and a lot of African countries, but since the question is focused on Nigeria, we're already grappling with the challenges that comes with debt repayment. So instead of loans, we need to push for grants under the Paris Agreement framework. Okay, that's one. And this would enable us to invest in sustainable development so that it will not just be that we're having the loans and then all we are doing with the loans is debt repayment and just continuing the cycle. If it's grants, we can be able to invest in climate mitigation actions as well as climate adaptation actions. Then secondly, I would also say under the Paris Agreement, one of the things that would help Nigeria that would support just energy transition in Nigeria is technology transfer. So it's not just about, getting the funds. We also need to advocate for affordable access to renewable technologies through partnership with developed countries. So if we can have their expertise, we can have their professionals come and train Nigerians to, whether the youths or those involved in this, on renewable technologies. I believe that this would help. And then the last thing, which is related to what I just talked about now, is capacity building. We need to include technical training for Nigerians in our agreements. So beyond just our agreements as a nation, as we are in the COP, having those negotiations and stakeholder discussions, we also need to include in the agreements technical trainings, because the technical training would enable us have a number of persons pass this things down, especially to underserved communities. A friend of mine in the energy space, she had a project in an underserved community, a clean cooking project, with over 100 women, about 120 of them. Right. Now, these women had not heard anything at all about clean cooking. So if you're going there now to empower this to let them know about it, beyond the advocacy, to teach them how to use them. And so if you're going to teach them how to use that, you have to also know. We need manpower. We need enough persons how to produce clean cooking stoves, and then also teach women how to use this thing. So it is something that should be part of
okay, now you talked about capacity, Ruth. You talked about capacity. If you can hear me, Ruth, you talked about capacity. How about, including it in, the curricula when it comes to our education systems in Nigeria? Will that help as well?
Distance in our curricula, from primary school to secondary school to even our tertiary institutions. We need to have things like climate science and renewable energy topics. It could either be as a subject or as a topic under a course. So that's as a topic under this basic science curriculum in primary and secondary school. So that from a young age, our young ones to be able to know about renewable energy sources. And then we also need to have practical trainings. We have a number of vocational institutions. Even in secondary schools, they have the lab. I think one of the labs that should be in secondary schools should be all this renewable energy lab. I remember back then when we were in secondary school, we have projects. Secondary school students can have projects to maybe produce clean cooking if possible. And then lastly on this, I would say partnership with NGOs.
Okay.
You know, we talk about the government a lot, but we could also partner with NGOs to provide this supplementary training on sustainability in our schools.
All right, let's hear, thank you so much, Ruth. Let's hear same question, let's move it to Ernesto. Let's hear from Ernesto. Ernesto, still talking about education systems in Nigeria. How can we better integrate climate change and clean energy into, the students' curricula to prepare future generations? I remember Desmond did, touch on this.
Okay, so I think the first thing that we need to realize is the average Nigerian, or at least the average Nigerian child, does not necessarily understand the gross impacts of climate change today. Right? When you try to explain to even adults that, the concept of climate change is actually real, a lot of them still tell you that, no, it's the white man's problem and things like that. So I think the most fundamental thing regarding education will be introducing the concept of climate change to children at very young ages, right? Help them understand that climate change is not a myth, it's not a story, it's a real life occurrence. And it's actually what we grapple with today, right? So these are like very important parts of the conversation. So these are things we talk about today. We don't really have enough of that included in children's curricula today, where people are generally aware about the concept of climate change. Also, regarding entertainment, there are other ways in which we could actually introduce climate change, introduce climate action into helping children understand it. For example, when there's a need for people to understand like a new topic or a new concept, it's introduced in different forms, introduced as cartoons, introduced as notebooks, as textbooks, and all of these things, to just help people understand it from a very holistic perspective. So for our children, for our younger people today to understand what climate is, we need to understand first that it's actually something that concerns us as a people, and there are other ways to curb it. So when we have actual solutions, these could then be translated to, books, into learning avenues for people like this, where people can watch. Then also introduced as say like, for example, way back in school, we had competitions where, you go and debate one school or the other. That way it just introduces the younger generation into actual problems that are faced with today. And we get to pick from their brains one. We also get to teach them what they need to be taught. So, having some of those things cumulative into your education makes our future generations better prepared to battle and to fight the issues with climate change.
Absolutely. So, Oluwatosin, now let's wrap up with you in just a minute. Ruth earlier talked about, partnering with NGOs, but how can, the government and NGOs come together to be able to address the psychological impact of energy poverty and also climate anxiety, which are real things out there, especially among younger populations? And we would love your answer in just a minute, please. Thank you.
Well, I think, like I said, it's one part of the climate space that nobody talks about, the mental part of the effect of climate change. So I think, like you mentioned, we need to understand and bring, more experts that understand this, the effect of what happens to people that have gone through flooding, people that, got to those skin cancers from the ray of suns and all. So we just need to find a way to prioritize and bring in more experts, that have been able to understand what people have gone through and help them to see, and turn whatever anger, whatever emotions that come from that into a form of a passion to help mitigate climate change.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the conversation this evening. Ernesto Dibia, Programs Manager, Public and Climate Health Advocate, And we also had Oluwatosin Ajide, Programs Lead, Nigeria Climate Innovative Center, and also both from Lagos, and then Ruth Soron-Nadi, Climate Policy Consultant in Enugu. Thank you so much, gentlemen and lady, for speaking with us today.
Thank you very much. Pleasure's all mine. Thank you.